You think crying makes you soft. You think it's a crack in your armor. You think the people who break down easily are the ones who can't handle the weight of the world. But let me tell me something you haven't considered. What if the people who cry easily are the only ones who truly see the world for what it is? What if their tears aren't a sign of fragility, but a refusal to go numb? You see, society has fed you a lie. They told you that strength is silence, that power is the ability to swallow your pain, shove it deep down, and keep moving like a machine. They told you that emotions are weakness, that vulnerability is a target on your back, and you believed them. You built walls so high that even you can't climb over them anymore. You became stone, cold, calculated, and you think that makes you strong. But here's the truth they never told you. The people who cry easily are carrying something you can't even comprehend. They're not weak. They're wide awake in a world full of sleepwalkers. They feel everything. The weight of betrayal, the sting of disappointment, the suffocating loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't understand them. And instead of numbing themselves with distractions, addictions, or ego, they let it out. They bleed, and you judge them for it. You want to know what real weakness is. Real weakness is pretending you're fine when you're crumbling inside. Real weakness is lying to yourself every single day, telling yourself that you don't need anyone, that you don't feel anything, that you're above it all. Real weakness is hiding behind a mask so thick that you forget who you are underneath it. The people who cry easily haven't forgotten. They know exactly who they are. They know their breaking points. They know their scars. And they're not afraid to acknowledge them. That's not weakness. That's brutal self-awareness. And most people can't handle that level of truth. So they call it sensitivity. They call it overthinking. They call it weakness. Because if they admitted that those tears were strength, they'd have to confront their own numbness. They'd have to admit that they've been running from themselves for years. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine two soldiers. One of them gets shot and keeps running, blood pouring from the wound, refusing to stop, refusing to acknowledge the pain. The other gets shot and falls to the ground, clutching the wound, feeling every ounce of agony, tears streaming down their face. Who do you think survives? The one who ignores the wound dies from blood loss before they even realize how bad it is. The one who feels it, who acknowledges it, who lets themselves break for a moment. That's the one who stops the bleeding. That's the one who lives. Crying is not the wound. Crying is the body's way of saying, I'm still alive. I still feel. I'm not dead inside yet. And in a world that wants you dead inside, that's an act of rebellion. You see, the people who cry easily are not collapsing under the weight of the world. They're releasing it. They're letting the poison out before it kills them from the inside. You, on the other hand, you're stockpiling it. Every betrayal you swallow, every disappointment you suppress, every moment you smile when you want to scream, you're building a dam, and dams don't hold forever. One day it's going to break, and when it does, it won't be tears. It'll be rage. It'll be destruction. It'll be a complete mental collapse. And then everyone will say, "Where did that come from?" But you'll know. You'll know it's been building for years. You'll know that every time you called someone else weak for crying, you were just terrified of facing your own emotions. Here's the part that's going to sting. The people who cry easily are more emotionally intelligent than you. They understand something you don't. They understand that emotions are not the enemy. Emotions are data. They're signals. They're your body's way of communicating what's wrong, what's right, what needs attention. When you ignore them, you're flying blind. You're making decisions based on ego and pride instead of truth and intuition. And that's why you keep repeating the same mistakes. That's why you keep ending up in the same toxic situations. That's why you keep wondering why nothing ever changes. Because you're not listening. You're not feeling. You're not processing. You're just surviving. And survival is not the same as living. The world doesn't want you to cry. The world wants you obedient. It wants you productive. It wants you smiling on the outside while you rot on the inside. Because a society full of people who feel too much is a society that asks too many questions. A society that demands change. A society that refuses to accept things as they are. But a society full of numb, emotionless machines. That's easy to control. That's easy to exploit. That's easy to manipulate, so they teach you early. Boys don't cry. Big girls don't whine. Toughen up. Grow a thicker skin. Stop being so sensitive. And you internalized it. You wore it like armor. And now you're drowning in your own silence. Let me tell you what happens to people who never cry. They become ghosts. They walk through life disconnected, detached, unable to form real connections, because real connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires feeling, and feeling requires the willingness to break. But they refuse to break. So they stay locked in their own prison, watching life happen to other people, wondering why they can't feel joy, why they can't feel love, why everything feels hollow. And the irony is, they think they're strong. They think they've mastered control, but control without feeling is just another word for emptiness. Now let's talk about the people who cry easily. Let's talk about what's really happening in their brain. You think it's just weakness, just an inability to hold it together, but science tells a different story. People who cry easily have a heightened sensitivity to emotional stimuli. Their amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing emotions, is more active. They're not overreacting. They're reacting appropriately to the depth of what they're experiencing. Their tears are not random. They're precise. They're the body's response to an emotional overflow. And here's the kicker. Studies show that people who cry more often have lower levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, after they cry. Meaning, crying is literally detoxifying their body. It's releasing the tension. It's cleansing the system. While you're holding onto that stress, letting it eat away at your organs, your mental health, your relationships, they're flushing it out. They're healing in real time, and you're calling them weak for it. But here's where it gets even deeper. People who cry easily are often the ones who feel other people's emotions too. They're empaths. They don't just feel their own pain, they feel yours. They walk into a room and absorb the energy. They see through your fake smile. They notice the sadness in your voice when you say you're fine. And it wrecks them because they care, because they can't turn it off. And in a world full of people who don't care about anything, that's exhausting. So they cry, not because they're weak, but because they're carrying a weight you can't even see. They're crying for themselves and for you. And you don't even notice. You want to know the real psychology behind people who cry easily. They're the ones who haven't given up on humanity yet. They still believe that things can be better. They still believe that people can change. They still believe in connection, in love, in meaning. And every time the world proves them wrong, it breaks them a little. But they don't stop believing. They don't go numb. They don't shut down. They just cry. They let it out. And they keep going. That's not weakness. That's hope in its rawest form. That's strength disguised as tears. And if you can't see that, it's because you've already given up.